I will be your moderator as well as we talk about the power of activating national advertising locally. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart. I've been at Yelp for over 15 years and have worked on our local side of the business as well as our national side of the business. So very excited to talk to some folks who are experts in the field. Before I jump in and introduce our speakers, you have a poll up on your screen. So let us know what you thought of that first session. We'd really love to hear from you. And without further ado, let me introduce our guests. So we have everyone here. I will kick it off with Eric Gombo, who is the Senior Vice President of Performance Media at Spark Foundry, where he oversees paid search strategy and activation across various industries. We also have Krista Lang from Focus Brands, a brand I used to work closely here on at Yelp. Krista is the Senior Director of Media Strategy and Planning across 7 different brands, including Moe's, Cinnabon, and Sloshkis. And lastly, we're joined by Jon Asher, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of Nekter Juice Bar. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And let's jump right in. So let's start a really high level, 10,000 foot view of local marketing for national brands. Tell us, what does local advertising mean to you in your role? And why is it so important for national brands to invest in it? So I'll kick this one over to Krista to start.
Yeah, thanks, Khadija. I think being a restaurant category and being in the restaurant industry, local marketing is extremely important. We are serving customers in a local fashion with local cuisine and making sure that we're supporting the business. So local marketing, while we're doing a lot with national media and marketing, we want to make sure we support the local businesses as much as possible. Things change on a daily basis. We have supply chain issues. We have competitors coming in and out of the market. So local marketing is really important for us to support the business, right? We have underperforming or overperforming stores. We want to make sure to pivot to help support them best. And as it relates to my discipline in media planning and buying, we're really trying to understand the local impact that delivers to the whole system. So it's really important to focus on what that local region or market needs as it relates to the broader system.
That totally makes sense. Eric, I saw you're agreeing. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely agree with everything that Krista said. I think that ultimately, when you're talking about advertising locally for a national brand, it's really all about tailoring that consumer experience to make sure that they are feeling it in a one-to-one fashion. I think that it's very easy for the large national brand to feel mass media when you're kind of trying to talk to your consumers. And so I think the whole idea is really having it more personalized, having it more one-to-one. And so even though you might be a large-scale national brand, being able to speak to a consumer in whatever neighborhood or walk of life they might be in is ultimately going to be that incredibly important way to make that connection. And so I think it's incredibly important for brands to do it, but not just do it, but to do it effectively.
Definitely. Jon, how do you think about that at Nekter Juice Bar?
I very much agree. I think the name of the game these days is relevancy. People have just been blasted with so much messaging constantly on their phones, their TVs, the radio, everywhere, that when they see something that's relevant to them is when they tend to perk up and actually pay attention and just instead of ignoring everything that they're seeing. So the more you can do that one-to-one, that relevant messaging, the better.
Great. I love that you bring up relevancy because I think most brands recognize that this is really important, right? Yet research from Street Fight Magazine and Brand Muscle show that only about 16% of national brands, they don't localize their marketing at all. And 75% say they only have a moderate understanding of how to optimize performance on the local level. So why do you think that is? Like, what are the blockers that these brands are running into that causes them not to activate their marketing locally? So I know, Jon, you talk about relevancy, and I'm sure you know something about that, but what do you see kind of holding people back from being able to do that well?
Time and money, and time is obviously money. So creating content, we have over 200 locations. If you're creating content that's relevant to each one of those, you're talking about graphic designers, video editing, people coding custom messages within AdWords or wherever it happens to be. And that's just really difficult to do at scale. It's getting easier and easier with more tools. But really it just comes down to, either manpower, you're putting in hours, or you're paying somebody else to do it.
Yeah, definitely. What do you see, Krista, across focus brands with some of the challenges?
Yeah, I think some of the challenges are really how does the local market complement what we're doing nationally? So we put a lot of money from a media perspective into a national campaign. So I think trying to figure out from a local perspective how they complement that national buy and what resources they have to do that. I also think from our perspective, determining what markets are best utilized to advertise in. So thinking about things like an opportunity index. What markets should we be purchasing in? What are some data points that we can kind of really understand the nuances of that market? I think that's probably a barrier, and a lot of people don't have a lot of time and resources, as Jon mentioned. At the very tactical level, platforms like Google and Meta make it sometimes often difficult for us to kind of understand how to coordinate efforts nationally with local franchisees and local restaurants, and also report locally. So being able to measure effectiveness of media at a local marketing level when you have a national campaign going as well is extremely difficult and a huge barrier, definitely.
That totally makes sense. I want to jump back to something you both mentioned, and you said manpower, right? Like these things take time, money, effort. I'd love to get a sense. Are there any kind of tactical tools that you use or ways you've been able to make your teams more efficient and really to be able to do this at scale? Because I think that's one of those practical things that's really tough, right? If you have to sit down and individualize copy, or coming up with tags like for particular markets. How have you approached doing this at scale, or what have you found to be effective in that way? And now kick it back to you, Jon, and then Eric, I want to hear from you next on this one.
Okay. So one tool we really like is Soshi. So it's basically something that creates listings with individual content, copy, landing pages, and allows us to post localized content at scale across a bunch of different Facebook, Google properties. So basically we'd say, hey, insert city name here, come get your favorite acai bowl today. So that Google sees it as localized, people see it as localized, but really it doesn't, we're not sitting there into 200 different, well, 200 times however many properties, pages, typing these things into individually. It's one, it's done. It also allows us to use AI type technology to respond to reviews at scale using customized points that are within, different reviews that are left. So that's one of my favorite tools, and we've been using it for a few years now and seen great results.
Great. Eric, is there anything you use at Spark that's been beneficial for the team?
Yes, so there have been a few different tools. I'm not able to disclose necessarily the individual partners, but we have had a couple of them that we've used. Soshi is one that the team has had some experience with as well, as Jon mentioned. But I think on our side, just to echo some of the points that Krista and Jon said on the previous question, I think that a lot of the tools, from a media perspective, are not necessarily set up to help really deliver local at scale, alongside your national media. And so I do think that it is incumbent upon advertisers to do some research and do some due diligence in terms of identifying these, what some of these tools might look like. It makes life a lot easier, because a lot of times, as Jon mentioned, with his example, you really can't have that at scale without having an army of a team trying to activate on your behalf. And so there are tools that do exist. And I think ultimately, again, I can't necessarily get into too many of the details, but there have been a few of them that we've worked with that are just a major game changer when you're talking about trying to scale things.
That's great. It's good to know there's lots of tools out there, and probably doing the research and figuring out what's best for the business makes sense. Eric, I know that Spark helps companies really activate local markets. How do you think about approaching new markets? Like, what kind of market research goes into that? How do you think about tailoring those efforts when you're working with a brand that's actually going into a new market and trying to really be successful locally?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it definitely depends. A lot of it depends on the advertiser and kind of the footprint and the new market that you're ultimately looking to explore. I think a lot of times, if there are similar markets that you have been in the past, I think a lot of times some of those learnings can help really just set the general groundwork of what it is that you're looking to activate on in the new market. And similar markets are hard to define sometimes, because sometimes it could mean similar geographically. Sometimes it could mean you anticipate similar shopping patterns for one reason or another. But I do think that is a good place to start. Is what do you already have experience with? Because conducting market research is a somewhat time-intensive exercise in and of itself. And so I think when you're starting out, being able to leverage previous learnings that you might already have through existing stores or franchise locations ultimately will kind of be in your best interest. Is again kind of a starting point, and then building out the market research from there.
I love it. I'm back. Krista, what are your thoughts on this one? I know Focus Brand has a ton of different markets you're trying to activate in. What do you do when you go into a new market?
Yeah, grand openings and new markets and expansion is definitely a huge area of growth as we open new stores. We do a lot of research. I think in general, we try to understand the competitive audience there, the competitive presence of other restaurant categories in the industry. We look at kind of the surrounding area, the demographics of a market, what is going to appeal to them, how do we start to market to them most effectively. We also have employed a grand opening, like emerging market test and learn process. So we go into a market, we test a bunch of marketing tactics depending on the market size, and we've been able to kind of correlate all of that data together, combine it, and put a program together for emerging markets that we can hand out to any new emerging market and say, these are the tools, the tactics, the things that are working, and here's data to prove it. Here's a toolkit, a playbook to basically go and execute a marketing plan with some customization that can also happen. So that's been really helpful for us. I think also we've spent a lot of time developing toolkits and creative templates as we have promos and activations for local franchisees to partake, and it's an easy toolkit that they can just go and implement themselves. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible to support any new market opening.
Krista, I'm curious because Focus Brand has so many different stores, right? And so many different kind of brands. Do you find that there is more similarities between activating in certain regions or certain locales, or does it feel kind of individual for each brand in that location?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a mix of both. Like we are supposed to, at a national level and a support from a corporate perspective, a franchisor, we are geared with making sure that they have all the support they need, any toolkit, any customization or consolidation of resources. They also have national ad funds, and we supply them any additional resources they need in terms of researching, like I said, demographics, the surrounding area, competitive presence. It does vary, obviously, from a store opening in New York to San Antonio, Texas. They're very different markets. So we try to provide the data that's going to allow them to understand what's needed in those markets. And we also have boots on the ground. Our franchisees have local agencies that kind of help as well, kind of determine what's specifically needed from a community perspective, or even fundraising, things like that, how they get involved in their own community. That's beyond kind of the national things that we can do.
That's great. Jon, I feel like Nekter Juice Bar has been one of those brands we've been able to actively see grow. How have you thought about going into new markets, also with like a newer concept?
Great question. So before we open any store, we're looking at psychographics, demographics, but the new regions are a little bit different. We'll spend a little bit more in order to find out what's going to work in that region. So we've got our toolkits of things that we know work in general for most stores, but we'll put a little extra budget into that to see what's going to work well for that one. So then we can really dial in, see what's going to have the best return on investment or ad spend for that particular region. And shuffle more of the budget towards there. And then we also have, all the templates and the toolkits and everything available to help, whoever the store owner is, boots on the ground, calling local businesses, templates available to work with local gyms or whatever it happens to be, just to make things as easy as possible for them.
Great. And so my takeaway here is have a template, figure out what works, do it again, repeat, refine. It seems like that's a really important process. I want to come back to the idea of different tools. What are some of your favorite tools to help you with local marketing? Is there anything else that helps you scale, or any particular channels that you love? So Eric, I'll kick this one over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I am a performance media advertiser through and through. So I will always, go back to those performance channels. So paid search, paid social. I think that, in terms of from a local perspective, there's just a whole lot of breadth and depth that you're able to achieve within those two channels. I know that we spoke about some of the challenges from a scaling perspective. Those definitely exist, and that's where you want to have those supplemental tools that are in the marketplace to ultimately help you, be able to do that at scale. But I think that, between search and social, I think that it's a really good starting point in terms of just how to get into your new market and speak to them in that one-to-one perspective. It also, one of some of the benefits of those channels is that you're able to do a decent amount with a limited budget. I think, when you're looking elsewhere, otherwise you could get spread pretty thin, especially if you're talking about a pretty small market and you don't necessarily have a whole lot of, meaty dollars to play with. You can try to get a bit more strategic within those performance channels to make sure that you're doing the most with what you have.
Great. Krista, what have you found has been beneficial when you think about different tools or channels that you're using?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, we have hundreds of stores across the country. So we use tools like Yext to help us with profile management on things like Meta and Google across the system. They help us kind of in the store locations get in the system so they're searchable online and that people can find them. Obviously, Yelp store pages, I'll give a plug to Yelp. Those are very helpful for us as it relates to making sure our profiles are updated and that we are out there in SEO. You guys do a great job with SEO. So trying to make sure our locations are listed. Google My Business, which I think just changed names, is really helpful as well. I'll echo Eric. I think search Google Performance Max, which is really focused on store visit media objectives, is really helpful because it can help you show up in maps in a certain way. It can help you show up in other Google products. So those are tools that we utilize really to get as local as possible. I also mentioned kind of the checklists that we have. We give checklists to help us figure out what's going on in a market and things for the franchisees to kind of utilize, as well as I think I mentioned figuring out an opportunity index, right? Like what data sources can we have to understand the demographics of a market, the customer satisfaction when you do open store locations, how is that resonating with customers? Anything from a share of voice, share of market perspective we look at as well. We want to make sure we're focused in the right areas with the right weights. So there's a lot of the tools that we use.
That's great. I know, Jon, earlier you mentioned Sochi. We did have a question that came in before I took a small break. I think it was, is there any reason you'd recommend Sochi over, I believe it was Opinion or Opinion? Are you familiar with that one, Jon?
I'm not familiar with that one.
Okay.
Sochi's very good.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say they're very strong. If you want a feature and it's gonna work well, they'll do something to make it happen. They're very fast, very agile, good at pivoting. They're a big portion of our listings. So going off of what Krista was saying, listings very important for us. So a search engine optimization. So we are, heavily investing into those things. And it's really paying off. So before we even have a store open, we're ranking in that Google local pack before it's open, which is pretty crazy. So those are two great tools. I'll give Yelp a plug as well. We do a lot of Yelp advertising, especially for opening new stores, new markets. And as Eric said, paid search, paid social, those are definitely huge. And one thing we do is we know that not every one of these channels is going to work perfectly for our franchisees. So we'll subsidize some of these things and allow them to try it at, partially our costs. So they can try Yelp ads. They can try, we have a very good agency on the ad side of things where we'll pay for the setup and the management and the content creation and everything for their particular store. So they can test things out and see what's going to work and then start investing heavily in things that work for that location.
Yeah, that's a really good point. When you're thinking about your local advertising for your franchisees, or what they are needing to do out of the stores, like what are some things you try to make easy for them? I assume there's this breadth that, you're going to kind of cover the brand and there's a lot of advertising that's just happening nationally, but what is that responsibility you think about with the franchisee or the store owner, or maybe even the manager, as far as kind of help driving some of this locally too?
It's funny because I always say my goal is to make marketing easy button for our franchisees. So I want to make everything easy for them. I don't want them to have to worry about anything. So We try to integrate our technologies as much as possible. Right now, if you want to pause a store, you can do it within one platform and it'll go out to everywhere. All of their listings, their local pages we built for them. If they want to change their hours, addresses, anything, they do it in one spot and it goes out everywhere automatically. The templates, training, basically we try and make everything as easy as possible because we know marketing, some people are not meant for it. And what they want to do is they want to open a franchise and get that special sauce, and we just try to give them as much of that as we can.
I love that. Krista, is there anything you would add to that for focus brands as far as thinking about, is there anything the store owners have to own with this local marketing piece, or are there things that you've kind of simplified that have been really successful for them?
Yeah, I definitely echo what Jon is saying. I think anything that we can make it easy is a goal. We actually have created an entire digital ecosystem called our hub, where every franchisee, every owner gets access to this hub. And we have consolidated training. So as new menu items come out, menu innovation, new products come out, there's video webinars that they can sign into and learn about the product. They can have we have a lot of high school students, a lot of people that work in our stores. So we're trying to make it as fun as possible from a learning perspective. So we try to do a lot of video, a lot of social, there's a reward system. We try to give them swag as much as possible. So we're always engaging with our franchise owners and operators to make sure that we're supporting them in the education and the selling of our products in the best way possible, and that they understand what products are coming, what the benefits of the brand is. So we do that all on, like I said, this digital marketing hub that we've created, and we even track their engagement. So we know the stores that are logging in and watching the webinar and the videos. We know who's engaging. There's rewards systems that we can plug in there, plug and play if they want to give rewards to their employees. So that's been a huge win, I think, collectively from a training and operations perspective that we do.
That's great. You make me want to learn how to run a store, Krista.
It's fun.
I in my history, I definitely have spent some time in restaurants, and so I know it can be a ton of fun. Eric, we had a question come in that I think might be fun for you. Someone who's watching today asks, what if you don't have a local physical location? And in this instance, someone has a vocational school offering an online degree, and they say it's been challenging to get proof that they're a real school. So we were thinking about working with brands who don't have those physical locations, but want to get that localized presence. What are some things you would think about at Spark Foundry that would be beneficial?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think that certainly when you don't have that physical location presence, there are certain things that are going to be off the table immediately. I think that from a localization standpoint, part of it is those campaign strategies of activating locally, and some of them were already mentioned, whether it's through Yelp or whether it's through Performance Max campaigns or things of that nature, where some of it will require a physical location if you're looking to drive people, obviously. The other piece of it, honestly, is a lot to do with how you are, messaging and creative, and how you're speaking to people in those specific regions. And that really does not require any sort of, brick and mortar physical location. It's really just about what the region is that you're looking to, to enter, and how you're talking to people that live there. And so I think that you're, theoretically should be able to have that customized messaging or audience approach from that more localized perspective, even though you don't have the brick and mortar, recognizing that there are going to be limitations or pieces that are not going to make sense for you as a brand, because ultimately, if you don't have that physical component, again, there isn't going to be that same, foot traffic that you're ultimately looking to drive. So I think that there are pieces of a localized, marketing plan that will still absolutely make sense, and then other pieces that probably won't necessarily be as applicable.
Totally makes sense. We do have time. If there's questions from the audience, feel free to go ahead and chat them in, and we can let our experts take a crack at them. Here's just a really great, I think, general marketing question that came in. Is it more beneficial to prioritize retaining your existing loyal customers who enjoy your product or brand, or should you concentrate on acquiring new customers? And so loyal customers versus new customers, maybe it's not a versus, but Jon, I would love to hear how Nekter Juice Bar thinks about this.
Yeah, it's definitely an and. So you want to cater to both of them. Obviously, you're always going to have some churn of your loyal customers for whatever reason. They move, they get a bad item, whatever it happens to be. You're going to lose some of those. So you need to add more into the top of the funnel. And I think a lot of the strategies that we've talked about today are key in doing that.
And how do you think about that at Focus Brands, Krista?
Yeah, definitely agree. It's an and, it's not an either or, but I do think it is about understanding the differences between those two and being really specific about the new customers you're trying to acquire. So, for instance, one of our brands is we have some data that at the age of 40, they fall out of the brand, right? Where they don't come back to the brand. And that's maybe okay. So how do we either retain them and have strategies specifically against them to kind of retain them as long as we can, or to Jon's point, how do we get new customers in that sweet spot that engages with our brands on a regular basis? We have stats that if you advertise and get one more customer to purchase one more time across every store, it would increase revenue 10 to 20% for the year. So there's definitely a benefit to understanding your loyal customers and what's going to drive them. We tend to upsell, right, with additional items. We tend to make sure that we are focused on adding new items that pull them in, or add-ons, right? Like get nuggets and a drink, get a pretzel and a drink. What are those things that we can continue to market to them to kind of either drive upsell or frequency? What are some additional occasions that we look at? So again, I think it's both, and every audience, new or loyal, may have some nuances to them that you really should try to personalize and figure out as much as possible.
When you think about the breakdown of investment, right? Investing in that loyal customer versus investing in that new customer. Do you feel like there's a sway of where that budget goes when you're looking at the brand long term? I think these are the decisions you have to make. You have limited resources. Um, and so what have you found to be kind of that breakdown when you think about, new customer acquisition costs, investing in a loyalty program, keeping that going? Does that change year over year? I would love to just hear more, how Focus Brands approaches that, and then maybe hear from you, Jon and Eric, on that as well.
Yeah, we're definitely investing in first party data and understanding our customers more often, and then being able to target them effectively in media. So, for instance, we can suppress our high frequency, high value customers. We know that they're going to come into our restaurants. So we suppress them and not target media against them. We can upload the CRM database in a hashed and privacy manner with LiveRamp, and we can make sure we target them. Or we can understand lapsed customers, right? If you've been a loyal member of Auntie Anne's and you come in weekly and all of a sudden you stop dropping off purchase, we can start targeting you with a more relevant offer or a more aggressive offer to pull you back in. So definitely think investing in any type of CRM platform is really important to be able to effectively target your most loyal customers and those customers you want to continue to retain. It also helps us acquire new customers. We can take our high value, high frequency customers and create lookalike targets in digital marketing and be able to say, these guys have this type of behavior. Let's mirror that, try to find them and the best behaviors that they have online and target them, and our acquisition rates go down when we do that. So there's huge benefit to that.
Yeah, I love all that tactical advice. It's funny that you mentioned Auntie M's, because I think in my family, if there is a mall or an airport, it is not left without a pretzel. So from Auntie M's, so we certainly have a pattern of loyalty that I think would be funny to track. Jon, when you're thinking about that, as far as like where to invest and how to invest with your loyal customers versus new customer acquisitions, what kind of approaches do you take?
Yeah, building on what Krista said, the great thing about our loyalty customers, we already know so much about them, and it is very inexpensive to reach out to them with an offer or a message. Emails are ridiculously cheap. Whereas if you're aiming at that new customer you're trying to acquire, that tends to be a good amount more expensive because they don't know about your brand. You have to do some sort of paid search method for them, especially if they're not actively already searching for your product and service out there. So the cheaper, easier way is to focus on, you could focus on 5% of your customers, and there's a good chance you could have a very, very outsized effect and see 30% growth from that, just focusing on one tiny little segment. So loyalty is the way to go for that quick, easy thing. That's the, low hanging fruit 80-20 rule. But you definitely can't ignore bringing in new customers if you're looking at growth.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned email. It's still relevant. People still open them. I think especially well-crafted, pertinent, intentional emails. And so it's always, getting that first-party data and that email address is an easy way to stay in contact with your loyal fan base. Eric, how do you at Spark Foundry think about this when you're advising clients and working with brands? And do you see that brands are more geared towards wanting to work with the agency for new customers or loyalty or both? What are they typically asking for?
Yeah, so we definitely see a pretty wide spectrum depending on the client. And I think that as Krista mentioned, having a robust CRM solution in place is going to be incredibly important to make sure that you have that healthy first-party data and ultimately that it's segmented in a way that is impactful for your business. I think the other piece that really comes into play here is measurement, right? When you're talking about measurement, it's not, hopefully, advertisers are starting to get beyond last click. And so when you're talking about things like incrementality, when you're talking about things like lifetime value, I think that's really where that split between existing or new customers comes into play. Because generally speaking, as Jon mentioned, it is always going to be cheaper to get a conversion from an existing customer. They already know your brand, you can speak to them a lot more easily. But from an incrementality standpoint, that might not necessarily be the place where it makes sense for you as an advertiser to place your next dollar, because if that person is going to convert regardless, do you really want to spend media dollars trying to speak to them? And so I think that's where it is incredibly important to try to have that, more sophisticated measurement solution in place if possible, to really have a better understanding of not just what that, conversion or revenue looks like, but also from an incrementality standpoint, again, where do you want to strategically place that next dollar in market?
Yeah, I love that. We have a fun, very tactical question, which I think would be interesting to hear from all of you on, is what's your opinion on geofencing? Would you geofence competitors? So we don't have to, you don't have to give all your market secrets away. But in thinking about that in your own marketing tactics, how do you think about geofencing kind of in that local versus national market? So Jon, I'll kick that one over to you.
We definitely use geofencing on occasion. As Krista mentioned, Google Performance Max is one of our best ways we've seen of blanketing an area with multiple different types of media. And we do see great results there. But there are times when we'll do some geofencing, depending on the strategy we're looking at.
Makes sense. Any comments for you on that one, Krista?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely do radius targeting around store locations to make sure that we're reaching the right relevant person in that decision-making time period or location. Geofencing, we have tested, especially in our mall-based brands. We talked about Auntie Anne's, Cinnabon. There's opportunity to kind of reach customers in that location as they're looking to have that impulse purchase. So yeah, we've definitely tested it out. Oftentimes from a technology perspective, it can be hard, especially in mall-based brands, like I mentioned, to isolate across the multiple stores. So I do think being able to understand the technology and the methodology of any provider's product is going to be helpful in determining kind of what that polygon is, what that location lat long is, to make sure you're not wasting dollars or being able to not effectively reach the right kind of customer in that specific area.
That totally makes sense. Eric, I have one for you about balance. I love talking about balance. And we have someone who asks, how do you balance the goals of national investment versus local investment, branding versus performance, or like in-store foot traffic versus e-com? And so I feel like we've talked a lot about balancing the investment, but we haven't touched much on branding versus performance advertising or in-store versus e-com. Any thoughts on those and what tends to be a good balance in this day and age for brands?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing that I'll say is there isn't a silver bullet. It's not like I could say, 60-40, brand versus performance will make sense for everyone, because it is, certainly more nuanced reality than that. What I would say is, starting with the e-com versus in-store, I think a lot of it honestly has to do with margins and your store footprint. If you are an advertiser that has stores on every block and the in-store foot traffic accounts for 90% of your sales, you're going to have a very different marketing strategy than if you're primarily e-com with a limited footprint, from a brick and mortar perspective, that people are ultimately able to get into. So I think, having a good sense of your own brand and kind of what your realities are for that in-store versus online and kind of what that split ends up looking like, that's going to be incredibly important when you're trying to figure out how you want to split your budgets between the two. And then from a brand and performance standpoint, I think a lot of it has to do, again, with, number one, who you are as an advertiser, and number two, what it is that you're looking for your dollars to achieve. I think when you're talking about, the different verticals that exist, you're going to have a lot more performance focused for a D2C vertical. So if you're thinking of, QSR as an example, that might be a lot more performance led. Whereas if you're talking about like CPG, where it's a little bit less, direct client or direct customer facing, you might have a bit more in the branding space. Certainly, what I would say is for anyone who is, looking to enter a new market, or if you're a newer brand, it is going to be incredibly important to have some of that branding. I think the initial instinct of a brand is we need sales. Let's invest in performance. And I'm a performance person, so I love performance. But if you don't have that brand recognition, it's going to be very hard to get that traction. And so, a little bit of a scattered answer. Hopefully that was clear, though, in terms of kind of some of the thoughts of how those splits might make sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I think it's really easy to say, I'm going to spend this money to get this customer today. But it helps if the customer knows who you are, if you're going about this for the first time. We have just a couple minutes left, and I have a question I would love to round robin to each of you on what advice would you share with any marketers in the audience who really want to implement local advertising, but they haven't done it yet. Where should they start? How would you recommend kicking it off? So, Jon, let's start with you on this one.
Start anywhere. So, what we've built has been over a long time. I've been at Nekter for 8 years now. We started with an app. We started building listings and SEO. We started building all these templates, training modules, and you're not going to get there overnight. So if you're getting a request or if there's something that you are seeing in front of you, just start there and you'll get there eventually.
I love that. Just start it. Krista, what are your pieces of advice on where to kick off a local strategy?
Yeah, it depends on if you are part of a larger corporation that does have national resources like Focus and Nekter, as it relates to understanding the resources you do have, understand who can help you within your organization, where you can learn from, right? If there's other franchisees or other store locations that have done this before, I think reaching out and seeing what's worked it's always an easy way to get in. I think really understanding your market, understanding your customer, understanding your differentiation, your value proposition is going to be really important as well, because it may vary by location, it may vary by region. So making sure you really truly understand what you're offering and who you're offering it to, and what occasions you serve and what the psychographics of your audience is. All of that I think is extremely helpful in determining. There's lots of free resources out there, census data for demographics. There's lots of resources that you can use as it relates to that, or hire an agency, hire a marketer, hire a freelancer to help. I think that is always beneficial if you yourself are an owner operator and don't have that marketing background. There's lots of people out there I know to help from an advertising and marketing perspective.
Call up Spark Foundry. And Eric, let's let you have the last word on this. Any advice you would offer?
Yeah, I mean, I think, both Jon and Krista, I agree with everything that both of them said. I think ultimately you want to make sure that you're starting somewhere. To Krista's point, I think there are a lot of people out there who can help. So if it's getting off the ground seems insurmountable, it might make sense to contact, whether it's an agency or if you have, again, if it's a national brand, just starting at the center and seeing what resources are ultimately available. I think that it's going to be important for a lot of brands to have some kind of proof of concept before you scale. So I wouldn't think of it as, oh my God, I have 600 locations. How am I going to do this? Start with 6 and try to build what that structure should look like. And then, I mean, as Jon and Krista mentioned, there are playbooks that exist, or ultimately there should be playbooks that exist, and there should be an approach that you have to kind of how you're looking to scale this across your various locations. It's not going to happen overnight. And so I think it's really important to start small and then build from there, because otherwise it's just going to always seem insurmountable and you're never going to get off the ground. So just choosing that ideal starting point, and trying to build up process from there is going to be incredibly beneficial.
Thank you, Krista, Eric, Jon. Thank you so much for joining us today.